"I can fix this," said the poor girl. The billionaire laughed. "Until a move changed everything. Before we continue, please comment on which city you are watching from." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of downtown Manhattan as Walid al-Rashid's pristine black Rolls-Royce Phantom suddenly sputtered to a halt in the middle of Fifth Avenue. Steam began rising from beneath the hood of the $500,000 luxury vehicle, drawing curious stares from passers-by. Walid, dressed in his signature tailored Armani suit, stepped out with visible frustration etched across his face. As one of the youngest billionaires in the oil industry, mechanical failures were not part of his meticulously planned schedule. From a nearby fire escape, 7-year-old Harper Martinez watched the commotion unfold. Her small frame was barely visible among the hanging laundry her grandmother had set out to dry. Harper lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a corner bodega with her grandmother, Maria, who worked 3 jobs just to keep them afloat. Despite their circumstances, Harper possessed an extraordinary gift, an intuitive understanding of how things worked, from broken radios to malfunctioning washing machines. As a crowd gathered around the stranded vehicle, Walid barked orders into his phone, demanding his personal mechanic arrive immediately. The onlookers whispered among themselves, some taking photos of the billionaire's predicament. Harper observed the scene with keen interest, her sharp eyes studying the smoke pattern and the subtle sounds emanating from the engine. She had seen this type of problem before, not on a Rolls-Royce, certainly, but the principles remained the same. Without hesitation, Harper climbed down the fire escape and approached the imposing figure of Walid al-Rashid. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the pavement as she navigated through the crowd of well-dressed adults towering above her. Taking a deep breath, she looked up at the billionaire and spoke the words that would change both their lives forever. "I can fix this." The laughter that erupted from the crowd was immediate and harsh. Walid's dark eyes narrowed as he looked down at the small girl standing before him. Her clothes clearly second-hand, and her shoes held together with duct tape. "Who are you, little girl, to say you can repair a car of this caliber?" he exclaimed in accented English, his voice dripping with condescension. The surrounding onlookers chuckled and whispered among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be an amusing encounter. Harper stood her ground, her chin raised defiantly despite the intimidating presence of the billionaire and the mocking crowd. "My name is Harper, and I know cars," she said simply, her voice steady despite her young age. "The problem isn't in your engine block. It's your cooling system, specifically your radiator hose connection. The steam pattern and the sound tell me it's a loose coupling, not a major failure." Walid's expression shifted from amusement to annoyance. He had important meetings to attend, contracts worth millions to review, and here he was being lectured by a child who probably had never seen the inside of a luxury vehicle. "Listen, little girl," he said dismissively, waving his hand as if shooing away an insect. "This is a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It costs more than most people earn in a lifetime. You cannot possibly understand the complexity of its engineering." But Harper had already moved closer to the vehicle, circling around to examine the front end. Her grandmother had always taught her that actions spoke louder than words, and she had learned more about mechanical systems from helping fix broken appliances in their building than most people learned in technical school. As she knelt beside the car, she noticed exactly what she had suspected, a loose hose clamp near the radiator that had caused a small coolant leak. "Sir," she called out to Walid, "do you have a basic toolkit in your car? All I need is a screwdriver. Any screwdriver will work." The crowd's laughter intensified, but Harper ignored them. She had faced ridicule before. Living in poverty in one of the world's wealthiest neighborhoods meant constantly being underestimated and overlooked. Walid checked his expensive Rolex impatiently. His mechanic was still 20 minutes away, and traffic was beginning to build behind his stalled vehicle. Against his better judgment, and more out of curiosity than belief, he retrieved a small emergency toolkit from the trunk. "Fine," he said, handing her the small bag with obvious reluctance. "But when you fail, and you will fail, I want you to leave immediately." Harper took the toolkit without a word and selected a flathead screwdriver. As she worked beneath the hood, she explained what she was doing in simple terms, her small hands moving with surprising confidence and precision. "The hose clamp has loosened due to vibration and temperature changes," she said, her voice muffled from under the hood. "It's a common problem in high-performance vehicles because the materials expand and contract differently. Most people assume it's a major engine problem because of the steam, but it's actually a simple fix. Within minutes, Harper had tightened the loose connection and refilled the system with water from a nearby fire hydrant. The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the unusual spectacle of a young child working on one of the world's most expensive automobiles. As Harper stood up, wiping her hands on a piece of cloth she had found in the toolkit, she looked at Walid directly. "Try starting it now," she said quietly. Walid, now genuinely curious despite himself, slid back into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine purred to life smoothly, the steam had stopped, and all indicators showed normal operating parameters. The crowd fell silent, and several people began filming as the reality of what they had witnessed began to sink in. The silence that followed the engine's smooth startup was deafening. Walid sat in his driver's seat, staring at the dashboard in disbelief as every gauge read normal. The crowd of onlookers had grown to nearly 50 people, all witnessing something that challenged their fundamental assumptions about intelligence, capability, and social class. Harper stood beside the car, her small hands still dirty from the repair, waiting patiently for Walid's response. Slowly, Walid stepped out of the vehicle, his expression unreadable. For a man accustomed to being the smartest person in any room, this moment represented a profound shift in his worldview. He had built his empire on the belief that success correlated directly with education, privilege, and resources. Yet here stood a 7-year-old girl from the most disadvantaged background imaginable, who had just solved a problem that had stopped him completely. "How?" was all he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Harper shrugged, a gesture that seemed impossibly mature coming from someone so young. "I pay attention," she said simply. "When you don't have money to replace things, you learn to fix them. I've been helping my grandmother repair everything in our building since I was 5. Refrigerators, heaters, washing machines, they all work on similar principles. Rich or poor, physics doesn't change." Her words hit Walid like a physical blow. He thought about his own childhood in Dubai, surrounded by tutors, private schools, and every educational advantage money could buy. Yet this child Yemes, with no formal training and limited resources, possessed a practical intelligence that humbled him completely. She hadn't just fixed his car, she had exposed the limitations of his own privileged perspective. "What's your name again?" he asked, his tone now completely different from the condescending voice he had used moments before. "Harper Martinez," she replied, then pointed toward the fire escape above the bodega. "I live up there with my grandmother. She's probably watching from the window. She worries when I talk to strangers." Walid followed her gaze and indeed saw an elderly woman peering down from a small window, her face etched with concern. The contrast struck him immediately. His own penthouse apartment occupied an entire floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, while this remarkable child lived in a space probably smaller than his walk-in closet. "Harper," he said carefully, "what you just did, it was extraordinary. Not just the technical skill, but the confidence to act when everyone doubted you. That's the kind of thinking that builds empires." The crowd was dispersing now, but several people continued recording, sensing they had witnessed something significant. Harper looked up at Walid with eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. "Mr. Walid al-Rashid. Mr. Walid, my grandmother always says that God gives everyone gifts, but not everyone has the same opportunities to use them. I was lucky today. I had the right problem at the right time. But tomorrow I'll still be poor and you'll still be rich. And most people will still think kids like me can't do things like this." Her words contained a truth so profound and simply stated that Walid felt his entire belief system shifting. He had always attributed his success to his superior intelligence and business acumen, never fully acknowledging the massive advantages his wealth and connections had provided. This child had just demonstrated that raw talent existed everywhere, regardless of economic circumstances. "Harper," he said, making a decision that would alter both their futures, "what if I told you that didn't have to be true? What if there was a way to change that equation?" Harper tilted her head, studying his face with the same intense focus she had applied to diagnosing his car. "What do you mean?" Walid knelt down to her eye level, something he had never done with any other person in his adult life. "I mean, what if we could prove that talent has nothing to do with bank accounts? What if we could show the world that the next great innovator might be living above a bodega instead of in a mansion?" For the first time since the encounter began, Harper's confident demeanor wavered slightly. She had learned early in life that when things seemed too good to be true, they usually were. But something in Walid's expression suggested this was different, that her simple act of kindness and competence had triggered something larger than either of them had expected. "I don't understand," she said quietly. Walid stood up, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Neither do I, completely, but I think we just started something important, Harper Martinez, something that's going to change both our lives." 3 days after the Rolls-Royce incident, Walid found himself standing outside the small bodega beneath Harper's apartment at exactly 4:30 p.m., the time when Harper returned from school. He had spent those 3 days in a state of unprecedented contemplation, his usual business routine disrupted by thoughts of the remarkable child who had challenged everything he believed about intelligence and opportunity. His executive assistant had cancelled 2 board meetings and rescheduled 3 international conference calls as Walid wrestled with an idea that seemed both impossible and inevitable. When Harper emerged from the corner store with a small bag of groceries, she stopped short at seeing the impeccably dressed billionaire waiting for her. Today he wore a more casual outfit, still expensive, but less intimidating than his usual business attire. "Mr. Walid," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Is your car broken again?" "No, Harper. My car runs perfectly, thanks to you." He paused, studying her face. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said regarding talent and opportunity. I have a proposition for you, but I need to speak with your grandmother first. Would that be acceptable?" Harper's eyes narrowed slightly, the cautious wisdom of a child who had learned to be suspicious of adult promises. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that could change everything," Walid replied honestly. "But I believe in doing things properly. Your grandmother is your guardian, and any discussion about your future needs to include her." 20 minutes later, Walid found himself sitting in the tiny apartment above the bodega, accepting a cup of coffee from Maria Martinez, Harper's grandmother. The space was immaculate despite its size, filled with family photos and the warm scent of home cooking. Maria, a woman in her 60s with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, studied Walid with the same directness her granddaughter had displayed. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Maria began in accented English, "Harper told me what happened with your car. She has always been gifted with machines, ever since she was very small. But I must ask, why are you here?" Walid set down his coffee cup and leaned forward. "Mrs. Martinez, in my 28 years, I have met presidents, Nobel Prize winners, and some of the most brilliant minds in business and technology. Your granddaughter possesses something I have rarely encountered, an intuitive understanding of complex systems combined with the courage to act on that understanding, regardless of social expectations." Maria's expression remained neutral, waiting for him to continue. "I want to offer Harper educational opportunities that match her capabilities," Walid continued. "Private tutoring in engineering and mathematics, access to laboratories and workshops, mentorship from leading experts in technology and innovation. I want to see what happens when raw talent meets unlimited resources." "And what do you want in return?" Maria asked, her voice carrying the wariness of someone who had learned that generous offers usually came with hidden costs. "Nothing," Walid replied, then reconsidered. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I want to prove something to myself and to the world. I want to demonstrate that genius isn't limited by economic circumstances, that the next great breakthrough might come from someone who started with nothing but natural ability and determination." Harper, who had been listening quietly from her spot at the small kitchen table, finally spoke. "What if I fail? What if I'm not as smart as you think I am?" Walid turned to face her directly. "Harper, 3 days ago you diagnosed and repaired a complex mechanical failure that had completely stumped me, my driver, and would have challenged most professional mechanics. You did it with confidence, skill, and humility. The question isn't whether you're smart enough. It's whether I'm worthy of being part of your journey." Maria stood up and walked to the small window overlooking the street where the Rolls-Royce incident had occurred. After a long moment, she spoke without turning around. "Harper's parents died in a factory accident when she was 3. Since then, it has been just the 2 of us. I work 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed, and Harper has never complained, not once. She studies by streetlight when we cannot afford electricity, and she fixes our neighbors' broken appliances for free because she knows they struggle too. She turned back to face Walid. What you are offering sounds wonderful, but it also sounds temporary. What happens when you lose interest? What happens when Harper makes a mistake or fails to meet your expectations? We cannot afford to have our hopes raised and then destroyed. Mrs. Martinez, Walid said, standing to match her eye level, I am prepared to establish a legal trust fund that ensures Harper's education through university, regardless of any other factors. I am prepared to provide housing assistance for your family, healthcare coverage, and any other support necessary to remove financial barriers to Harper's development. This is not charity, it's an investment in human potential. Why? Harper asked suddenly. Why would you do all this for someone you just met? Walid was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. Because 3 days ago, you showed me something I had never seen before. Pure talent, unencumbered by privilege or pretense. In my world, everything is transactional, calculated for advantage. But you helped me simply because you could, with no expectation of reward. That kind of integrity, combined with your natural abilities, represents something incredibly rare. He paused, then continued more softly. And perhaps because I want to believe that success should be determined by character and capability, not by the circumstances of one's birth. If I can help prove that, then maybe I can finally feel like I've earned my own success, rather than simply inherited it. Maria and Harper exchanged a look that communicated volumes, years of shared struggle, mutual dependence, and hard-won wisdom about trusting others. Finally, Maria spoke. What would be the first step? Educational assessment, Walid replied immediately. I want to understand the full scope of Harper's abilities before we design her educational pathway. Then we begin with supplementary tutoring, while she continues her regular schooling, gradually expanding her opportunities as we better understand her interests and strengths. Harper stood up from the table, her young face serious with the weight of the decision before them. Mr. Walid, if I agree to this, I want to help other kids too. Kids like me who are smart but poor. If you're going to invest in proving that talent exists everywhere, then it can't just be about one person. Walid stared at her in amazement. Even in considering an opportunity that could transform her entire life, Harper's first instinct was to think about others in similar circumstances. At that moment, he realized he wasn't just witnessing exceptional intelligence. He was encountering exceptional character. Harper, he said quietly, I think you just outlined the mission statement for something much larger than either of us initially imagined. 6 months after that first meeting in the tiny apartment, Harper Martinez was solving calculus problems that would challenge most high school students, while simultaneously designing a water filtration system for her neighborhood. The transformation had been remarkable, but not in the way Walid had initially expected. Rather than simply accelerating Harper's individual education, their partnership had evolved into something far more significant. A comprehensive program that identified and supported exceptional talent in underserved communities. The Martinez Foundation, named at Harper's insistence to honor her grandmother's sacrifices, now occupied an entire floor of a renovated warehouse in Harper's neighborhood. Unlike the gleaming corporate offices Walid was accustomed to, this space buzzed with an energy that was both intellectual and deeply personal. Children ranging from ages 8 to 17 worked alongside PhD researchers, their projects spanning everything from renewable energy solutions to advanced robotics. Harper, now 8 years old, had become something unprecedented, a child prodigy who refused to be separated from her community. Every morning, she attended regular public school with her neighborhood friends. Every afternoon, she worked in the foundation's laboratories and workshops. Every evening, she returned to the apartment above the bodega, where she helped her grandmother with dinner and completed her regular homework before diving into advanced mathematics and engineering texts. She insists on maintaining her normal life, Walid explained to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the educational psychologist he had hired to monitor Harper's development. They were watching through a window as Harper demonstrated basic circuitry principles to a group of younger children, her explanations simultaneously sophisticated and accessible. Most gifted children in her situation would want to escape their circumstances completely. Harper wants to elevate her entire community. Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. In my 20 years of working with exceptional children, I've never seen anything quite like this. Harper's IQ tests indicate genius-level intelligence across multiple domains, but her emotional intelligence and social awareness are equally remarkable. She understands that individual success without community support is ultimately hollow. Through the window, they watched as Harper helped 9-year-old Marcus Thompson troubleshoot a simple motor design. Marcus, identified through the Foundation's community outreach program, had demonstrated exceptional mechanical aptitude despite struggling with traditional academics. Under Harper's mentorship, his confidence had transformed dramatically. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the excitement of discovery, "if we adjust the gear ratio here, we could increase the torque output by almost 30%. "Exactly," Harper replied, beaming with pride at his insight. "And what would that mean for our water pump project?" "More water, less energy," Marcus exclaimed, then paused. "But wait, wouldn't the increased torque put more stress on the housing unit?" Harper grinned. "What do you think we should do about that?" Walid found himself smiling as he watched the interaction. 6 months ago, he had been a successful but isolated billionaire, convinced that intelligence was a rare commodity, found primarily among the educated elite. Harper had shown him that exceptional thinking existed everywhere, waiting only for opportunity and encouragement. The community integration aspect was Harper's idea from the beginning, Walid told Dr. Rodriguez. She refused advanced placement in elite private schools. She insisted that any educational enhancement had to include her friends and neighbors. At first, I thought she was limiting herself, but I've come to realize she was teaching me something fundamental about sustainable success. The Foundation's model was indeed revolutionary. Rather than extracting promising children from their communities, they invested in the communities themselves. They provided advanced educational resources, state-of-the-art equipment, and expert mentorship while allowing children to remain connected to their families and cultural identities. The results had exceeded even Walid's optimistic projections. Maria Martinez entered the observation room, carrying a tray of homemade sandwiches for the research team. At Walid's insistence, she had reduced her work schedule to one job and accepted a salary as the Foundation's community liaison coordinator. Her understanding of the neighborhood's needs and her natural leadership abilities had proven invaluable in gaining community trust and participation. "How many applications do we have for next month's intake?" Walid asked her. "Over 300, Maria replied, setting down the tray. "And not just from our neighborhood anymore. Word is spreading throughout the city. There are parents bringing their children from as far as Queens, hoping for evaluation and acceptance." Dr. Rodriguez picked up a sandwich, grateful for Maria's thoughtful gesture. The challenge now becomes scalability. Harper's personal involvement has been crucial to the program's success, but she can't mentor every child individually. We need to develop systems that capture her approach and make it replicable. Through the window, they watched Harper transition seamlessly from explaining advanced engineering concepts to helping a 6-year-old with basic arithmetic. Her patience was infinite, her enthusiasm infectious. More importantly, she had an intuitive understanding of how to meet each child at their level of comprehension while gently challenging them to reach higher. "She's already thinking about that," Walid said quietly. "Last week, she presented me with a proposal for a peer mentorship network. Older students would be trained to teach younger ones, creating a self-sustaining educational ecosystem. She even included detailed cost projections and suggested funding mechanisms." Maria laughed softly. She gets that from her mother. Carmen was always organizing the other factory workers, finding ways to make everyone's life a little easier. Harper has that same instinct. She cannot be happy unless everyone around her has a chance to succeed too. As if sensing their observation, Harper looked up from her work and waved at them through the window. Her smile was radiant, but Walid had learned to read the subtle signs of fatigue around her eyes. Despite her extraordinary capabilities, she was still an 8-year-old girl carrying responsibilities that would challenge most adults. "Are we asking too much of her?" Walid voiced the concern that had been growing in his mind. "She's become the face of this entire initiative, but she's still a child." Dr. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "In traditional terms, yes, we might be concerned about pressure and expectations, but Harper is not traditional in any sense. She seems to thrive on challenge and responsibility. The key is ensuring that she retains control over her own choices and that she never feels trapped by others' expectations of her. What do you mean? Maria asked. I mean that Harper's greatest strength is also her greatest vulnerability. She has such a powerful sense of duty to others that she might sacrifice her own needs and desires to meet their expectations. We need to constantly remind her that her worth is not determined by what she can do for others, but by who she is as a person. Walid nodded thoughtfully. Over the past 6 months, he had watched Harper accomplish things that defied conventional understanding of childhood development, but he had also seen moments when the weight of representing her community's hopes seemed to press heavily on her young shoulders. Perhaps, he said slowly, it's time we focused less on what Harper can achieve and more on ensuring she has the space to simply be a child when she needs to be. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning in March, almost exactly 1 year after Harper had first fixed Walid's Rolls-Royce. An investigative journalist named Patricia Chen had published a scathing expose in the New York Times titled "The Billionaire's Pet Prodigy, Exploitation or Education." The article questioned the ethics of Walid's relationship with Harper, suggesting that he was using her as a publicity stunt to improve his corporate image, while placing unreasonable pressure on a vulnerable child. Walid read the article in his penthouse office, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and devastation. Chen had interviewed former Foundation employees who portrayed him as a manipulative opportunist, quoted child psychology experts who warned against the dangers of accelerated education, and included photographs of Harper looking exhausted during a particularly intense study session. The narrative painted him as a wealthy predator exploiting a brilliant child for personal gain. The billionaire claims altruistic motives, Chen had written, but critics argue that al-Rashid has essentially purchased a human laboratory specimen, subjecting young Harper Martinez to an educational regimen that prioritizes achievement over childhood development. This child has been robbed of her youth in service of an adult's ego, says Dr. Margaret Williams, a child advocacy specialist who reviewed documentation of Harper's schedule. By noon, the story had gone viral on social media. A Save Harper was trending on Twitter, with thousands of people demanding that Child Protective Services investigate the foundation. Protesters had gathered outside the warehouse facility, carrying signs reading "Let kids be kids" and "Childhood is not for sale." News crews filmed from across the street, turning Harper's educational sanctuary into a media circus. Walid's phone rang continuously with calls from board members, lawyers, and crisis management consultants. His company's stock price had dropped 3% in the first hour of trading as investors worried about the reputational damage. But all of that paled in comparison to his real concern, how this public scrutiny was affecting Harper and her grandmother. When he arrived at the foundation facility, he found Maria Martinez standing in the main laboratory, surrounded by silent children and staff members. The usual buzz of creative energy had been replaced by an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear. Harper sat at her usual workstation, staring at a computer screen displaying the New York Times article, her young face pale and drawn. "Harper," Walid said softly, approaching her carefully, "how are you feeling?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her 9-year-old face. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "Are you just using me?" The question hit Walid like a physical blow. In the year since he had met Harper, she had become far more than a protégé or project. She had become like a daughter to him, forcing him to examine his values and priorities in ways that had fundamentally changed who he was as a person. The idea that she might doubt his motives was devastating. "Harper," he said, kneeling beside her chair, "everything I have done has been because I believe in you, and because I want to see you have every opportunity to reach your potential. But I also understand why this situation might look different to people who don't know us personally." Dr. Rodriguez appeared at his shoulder, her expression grim. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "All of us, including Harper, because she's at the center of this, and she deserves to understand what's happening and have input into how we respond." 20 minutes later, they sat in the Foundation's small conference room, Walid, Harper, Maria, Dr. Rodriguez, and James Patterson, the Foundation's Director of Operations. Outside, they could hear the chants of protesters and the hum of news helicopters overhead. "The fundamental question," Dr. Rodriguez began, Says whether Harper is here by her own choice or because adults have made decisions for her. The public narrative suggests that she's been pressured into an educational program that serves others' interests rather than her own. Harper had been quiet since Waleed's arrival, but now she spoke with a clarity that silenced the room. "Dr. Rodriguez, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Harper, when you were 9 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up?" Dr. Rodriguez smiled slightly. "I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was fascinated by animals and spent every free moment reading about zoology and animal behavior." "And did your parents encourage that interest?" "Yes, they did. They bought me books, took me to zoos and nature centers, and supported my curiosity." Harper nodded thoughtfully. "So when adults support a child's passion for animals, that's good parenting. But when adults support a child's passion for engineering and problem-solving, that's exploitation." The simplicity and logic of her question left the adults momentarily speechless. "Harper," Waleed said carefully, "the difference is that your interests have attracted public attention and significant resources. People are concerned that the pressure of expectations might be harmful to you." "But whose expectations?" Harper asked. "Mr. Waleed, you've never told me I had to achieve anything specific. You've provided resources and opportunities, but you've never demanded results. The only person putting pressure on me is me, because I love learning and I love helping others learn too." Maria reached over and took her granddaughter's hand. "Mija, these people are worried that you're missing out on being a regular kid. They think you should be playing with dolls and watching cartoons instead of studying mathematics and engineering." Harper's expression grew thoughtful. "Abuela, do you remember what I was doing before Mr. Waleed arrived? I was fixing broken radios and helping repair washing machines. I was reading every science book I could find at the library. I was already different. The only thing that changed was that now I have better tools and more interesting problems to solve." She paused, then continued with startling maturity. "I understand that people are trying to protect me, but they're trying to protect me from things I actually want to do. That's not protection. That's limitation." James Patterson, who had been silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "Harper, what would you like to say to the people who are concerned about you?" Harper considered the question seriously. "I would want them to know that I still play games with my friends, I still watch movies with my grandmother, and I still get excited about ice cream and birthday parties. But I also get excited about solving engineering problems and helping other kids discover what they're capable of. Why do those things have to be mutually exclusive?" She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the crowd of protesters. "And I would want them to know that trying to save me by taking away my opportunities isn't actually helping me. It's helping them feel better about their own assumptions about what childhood should look like." Waleed stared at Harper in amazement. In the span of 15 minutes, this 9-year-old girl had articulated a defense of their work that was more compelling than anything his team of lawyers and public relations experts had developed. She had identified the core issue with startling precision, the conflict between protecting children and empowering them to pursue their authentic interests. "Harper," he said slowly, "would you be willing to speak publicly about your experience, to help people understand your perspective?" Harper turned back to face the group, her expression serious but determined. "Yes," she said quietly, "but not to defend you, Mr. Waleed, to defend the right of kids like me to be who we actually are, instead of who adults think we should be." The decision to allow Harper to address the media controversy directly was not made lightly. After 2 days of intense discussion involving child psychologists, legal experts, and media consultants, it was Harper herself who proposed the solution that would ultimately reshape the entire narrative. Rather than a traditional press conference, she suggested hosting an open house at the foundation, where journalists could observe the daily operations and interview both students and parents without the artificial constraints of a staged media event. "If people want to understand what we do here," Harper had explained to the planning committee, "they need to see it, not just hear about it. Let them watch Marcus explain his water purification project, or see Sophia teaching basic coding to the younger kids. Let them talk to parents who can explain what their children were like before and after joining our program." Dr. Rodriguez had initially resisted the idea, concerned about exposing the other children to media scrutiny. But as the protests continued and more negative stories appeared in various publications, It became clear that a defensive posture was not sustainable. The foundation's work was too important, and Harper's vision too compelling to allow misconceptions and fears to destroy everything they had built. On the morning of the open house, Patricia Chen arrived early, accompanied by a photographer and a camera crew from a major news network. Her previous article had sparked the controversy, but she had agreed to participate in what she termed a more comprehensive examination of the foundation's work. Walid greeted her professionally, though the tension between them was evident. "Ms. Chen," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming. Harper is looking forward to showing you what we do here." "Mr. Al-Rashid," Chen replied coolly, "I hope you understand that my presence here doesn't indicate any change in my concerns about this situation. I remain deeply skeptical of any arrangement that places such intense focus on a young child." Before Walid could respond, Harper appeared at his side, dressed in her usual jeans and foundation t-shirt, looking remarkably calm for someone about to face hostile media scrutiny. "Mrs. Chen," she said, extending her own small hand, "I'm Harper. I read your article about me. Would you like to see what actually happens here?" Chen studied Harper carefully, perhaps looking for signs of coaching or stress. Instead, she encountered a poised, articulate child who seemed genuinely enthusiastic about sharing her work. "Yes," Chen said slowly, "I would very much like to see that." What followed was perhaps the most unusual journalism assignment of Chen's career. Instead of conducting a formal interview, she found herself following Harper through a typical day at the foundation, observing interactions that revealed a complex and nuanced reality that her initial article had failed to capture. The first stop was the elementary workshop, where Harper spent 30 minutes each day working with children aged 6 to 8. Chen watched as Harper helped 7-year-old David Rodriguez understand basic principles of leverage using a simple seesaw model. Harper's teaching style was patient and encouraging, but never condescending. "David, what happens when I move this weight closer to the center?" Harper asked, adjusting the demonstration. "It gets harder to lift," David exclaimed, then paused thoughtfully. "But why?" "Great question. Think about when you're trying to open a really tight jar. Do you put your hands close to the lid or far from the lid?" "Far from the lid," David replied. "It's easier that way." "Exactly. Same principle, just upside down. Distance gives you power." Chen found herself genuinely impressed by Harper's ability to make complex concepts accessible to younger children. But more striking was the obvious affection between Harper and the other students. This was not the sterile relationship between a prodigy and her subjects that Chen had expected to find. The morning continued with visits to various workshops and classrooms. Chen interviewed parents, teachers, and students, gradually assembling a picture that challenged her initial assumptions. Maria Santos, mother of 11-year-old Elena, explained how her daughter had been labeled as having learning disabilities in traditional school, only to thrive in the foundation's environment, where different types of intelligence were recognized and nurtured. "Elena couldn't sit still in regular class," Maria explained, "but here she can move around while she learns, and she can work on projects that interest her. Her confidence has completely transformed. She comes home excited about math, which I never thought I would see." Perhaps most compelling were Chen's conversations with the older students who had been part of the program for several months. 16-year-old Carlos Mendoza, who had joined the foundation after aging out of the foster care system, spoke with startling eloquence about how the program had changed his life trajectory. "Before I came here, I was headed nowhere," Carlos told Chen candidly. "I was angry, I was behind in school, and I had no reason to believe I could succeed at anything. Harper was the first person who ever looked at me and saw potential instead of problems." "But don't you think it's strange to be mentored by someone so much younger than you?" Chen asked. Carlos laughed. "Age is just a number. Harper understands things that most adults don't understand. She sees connections and possibilities that others miss. But more importantly, she believes in people. When someone believes in you like that, it changes how you see yourself." As the day progressed, Chen found her skepticism gradually giving way to something approaching wonder. The foundation was indeed an unusual environment, but the unusualness seemed to spring from its success in nurturing human potential rather than from any exploitative dynamic. The children were engaged, excited, and obviously happy. The parents were grateful and involved. The staff was dedicated and professional. The afternoon culminated with a presentation by Harper to a group of visiting educators from other cities who were interested in replicating the Foundation's model. Chen watched as Harper explained the philosophical principles underlying their approach, using language and concepts that would have challenged most graduate students. And traditional education assumes that all children should learn the same things at the same pace in the same way, Harper said to the group. But people aren't standardized products. We all have different strengths, different interests, and different ways of understanding the world. Instead of trying to make everyone fit the same mold, we try to help each person discover and develop their unique gifts. She paused, scanning the room with confidence that seemed natural rather than trained. The goal isn't to create more versions of me. The goal is to create better versions of each individual student. That requires personalized approaches, flexible structures, and most importantly, the belief that every child has something valuable to contribute. During the question period that followed, Dr. Sarah Williams, an education researcher from Stanford, raised a concern that Chen had been preparing to voice herself. Harper, while your results are impressive, aren't you concerned about the pressure of being held up as a model for other children? Don't you worry about the expectations that creates? Harper's response was immediate and thoughtful. Dr. Williams, I think that's exactly the wrong question. The pressure comes from limiting children, not from empowering them. When we tell kids they have to be normal and fit into predetermined categories, that's pressure. When we tell them they can explore their interests and develop their abilities, that's freedom. She gestured toward her fellow students, who were scattered throughout the room. Look around. Do Marcus, Sophia, Elena, or Carlos look stressed to you? They look excited because they're finally in an environment where their intelligence is recognized and valued, where they don't have to hide who they are or pretend to be less capable than they actually are. Chen found herself nodding unconsciously. The evidence was indeed overwhelming. Whatever her initial concerns about exploitation and pressure, what she was observing was the opposite. Children who were thriving in ways that traditional educational environments had never allowed. As the day concluded, Harper approached Chen with a directness that was becoming familiar. Ms. Chen, can I ask you something? Of course. When you wrote your article about me, what were you trying to protect me from? Chen considered the question carefully. I was trying to protect you from being used by adults for their own purposes, from having your childhood stolen in service of someone else's agenda. Harper nodded thoughtfully. I understand that impulse, and I appreciate that you care about children. But what if the thing you're trying to protect me from is actually the thing I most want to do? What if learning and teaching and solving problems isn't what's being done to me, but what I'm choosing to do? The question hung in the air between them, challenging not just Chen's assumptions about the Foundation, but her fundamental beliefs about childhood, education, and human potential. Patricia Chen's follow-up article, published 3 weeks later, carried the headline, I Was Wrong, Inside the Revolutionary Education Program That's Changing Lives. The piece offered a nuanced retraction of her earlier criticism while exploring the broader implications of what the Martinez Foundation had achieved. The article sparked a new wave of media attention, but this time the narrative had shifted dramatically. After spending extensive time observing the Foundation's operations, Chen wrote, I encountered something unprecedented, an educational environment where exceptional ability is nurtured without exploitation, where community values are preserved while individual potential is maximized, and where a 9-year-old girl has somehow created a model that challenges our most basic assumptions about learning, development, and success. The article featured interviews with education experts, child psychologists, and policy researchers who had initially shared Chen's concerns but had reached different conclusions after examining the Foundation's methods and outcomes. Dr. Margaret Williams, the child advocacy specialist who had been quoted critically in the original piece, provided a thoughtful reassessment of her position. I maintain that protecting children from exploitation is paramount, Dr. Williams explained in the new article, but I've come to realize that my definition of exploitation was too narrow. Preventing children from pursuing their authentic interests and developing their natural abilities can be just as harmful as pushing them toward goals they don't share. The positive media coverage brought new opportunities and new challenges. Education departments from 12 different states sent delegations to observe the foundation's methods. International organizations invited Harper to speak at conferences about innovative education models. Major philanthropists expressed interest in funding similar programs in other cities, but perhaps most significantly, the renewed attention brought Harper face to face with other children whose experiences paralleled her own. Through social media and news coverage, families with exceptional children reached out, sharing stories of frustration with traditional educational systems and seeking guidance about nurturing their children's abilities without sacrificing their emotional development. One such family was the Johnsons from Atlanta, whose 12-year-old daughter Zoe had taught herself advanced chemistry by watching online lectures and conducting experiments in their garage. Like Harper, Zoe had been dismissed by adults who couldn't believe that a child could master such complex concepts independently. The Johnsons had driven 14 hours to visit the foundation after reading about Harper's story. "When I met Zoe," Harper later told Waleed, "I realized that what we're doing here isn't really about me being special. It's about creating space for all the kids like us who think differently and learn differently. Zoe is brilliant, but she's also lonely because no one understands what excites her." That realization led Harper to propose what would become her most ambitious project yet, a network of foundation-affiliated programs that could support exceptional children while maintaining strong connections to their local communities. Rather than requiring families to relocate or children to leave their homes, the network would provide resources, mentorship, and peer connections across geographic boundaries. "We could use technology to connect kids like us all over the world," Harper explained to the Foundation's Board of Advisors. Zoe could work on chemistry projects with other young chemists in different cities. Marcus could share his engineering designs with kids who are working on similar problems. We could create a community of learners who understand each other, even if they're thousands of miles apart. Waleed listened to Harper's proposal with a mixture of pride and amazement. In the 18 months since he had met her, Harper had evolved from a remarkable individual student into a visionary leader who understood how to scale innovative solutions while preserving their essential humanity. Her proposal wasn't just about education. It was about creating support systems for children who often felt isolated by their exceptional abilities. Dr. Rodriguez, who had become Harper's closest academic mentor, raised important questions about implementation. "Harper, the concept is brilliant, but coordinating programs across multiple states and potentially multiple countries would require significant resources and careful oversight. How do we ensure quality control while maintaining the flexibility that makes our local program successful?" Harper had clearly anticipated the question. "We start small and grow organically. We begin with 5 cities, each with a local coordinator who understands their community's specific needs and culture. We provide training, resources, and ongoing support, but we don't dictate methods. Each location adapts our principles to their circumstances." She pulled out a tablet and displayed a presentation she had been working on. "I've been researching successful franchise models, but also cooperative networks like the Montessori Association. The key is balancing consistency of values with flexibility of implementation." Maria Martinez, who had been quietly observing the discussion, finally spoke. "Mija, this sounds wonderful. But are you sure you want to take on such a big responsibility? You're still only 9 years old." Harper turned to her grandmother with an expression of deep affection and respect. "Abuela, you always taught me that when God gives you gifts, you have a responsibility to use them to help others. This isn't a burden. It's an opportunity to make sure that no child like me has to choose between being smart and being accepted." The room fell silent as the adults absorbed the profound simplicity of Harper's motivation. Waleed found himself once again humbled by her combination of intellectual sophistication and moral clarity. She had identified a fundamental problem, the isolation experienced by exceptional children, and developed a scalable solution that addressed both individual needs and community values. "Harper," Waleed said slowly, "what you're proposing would require a significant expansion of our funding and infrastructure. Are you prepared for the complexity that would involve?" "Mr. Waleed," Harper replied with a slight smile, 18 months ago, you were prepared to help one kid from a poor neighborhood Look how that turned out. Sometimes the most important things start with impossible-sounding ideas. Over the following weeks, Harper threw herself into developing the network concept with characteristic intensity and thoroughness. She researched educational models from around the world, studied the logistics of multi-site coordination, and reached out to potential partner organizations in target cities. Her energy was infectious, inspiring the entire foundation team to think bigger about their mission and impact. The breakthrough came when Dr. James Chen, Patricia Chen's brother and a professor of educational technology at MIT, visited the foundation and encountered Harper's network proposal. As someone who had spent years studying how to scale innovative educational programs, he immediately grasped the significance of what Harper was envisioning. "This could work," he told Walid and Harper after reviewing her plans. "More than that, this could revolutionize how we think about gifted education. Instead of segregating exceptional children or trying to slow them down to match their peers, we create parallel support systems that allow them to remain integrated in their communities while accessing appropriate challenges and peer connections." Dr. Chen's endorsement came with an offer of partnership. MIT's education department was interested in providing research support and academic credibility to help the network concept attract serious attention from policymakers and funders. More importantly, his connections in the education technology field could help develop the digital platforms necessary to support long-distance collaboration between students. "What we're really talking about," Dr. Chen explained to a gathering of foundation supporters, "is democratizing access to exceptional education. Harper's model proves that you don't need elite institutions or enormous financial resources to nurture extraordinary talent. You need vision, commitment, and the willingness to prioritize individual potential over institutional convenience." As plans for the network took shape, Harper found herself at the center of something much larger than she had initially imagined. Media requests came from around the world. Education ministers from several countries expressed interest in implementing foundation-inspired programs. Publishers approached her about writing a book about her educational philosophy. But perhaps most meaningfully, letters arrived daily from children and parents who had felt isolated and misunderstood until they learned about Harper's story. These letters, more than any media coverage or professional recognition, reminded Harper why the work mattered. One letter, from a 10-year-old girl named Sarah in rural Montana, particularly moved Harper. Sarah had been designing and building robots since age 7, but her small town had no resources to support her interests. She had been labeled as weird by classmates and unfocused by teachers who didn't understand her passion for engineering. "When I saw you on the news," Sarah wrote, "I cried because I realized I wasn't alone. There are other kids like me who think about gears and circuits and programming languages instead of normal kid stuff. Maybe someday I could work on projects with other kids who understand why I get excited about robotics." Reading Sarah's letter, Harper felt the weight of responsibility that came with being a public figure, but also the profound satisfaction of knowing that her visibility was creating hope for other children who shared her experiences. The network wasn't just an educational concept. It was a lifeline for kids who had been waiting for someone to recognize and validate their unique gifts. 2 years after the Rolls-Royce incident, Harper Martinez stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from 193 countries about the future of global education. At 11 years old, she was the youngest person ever to address the UN on education policy, but her presence at the podium seemed entirely natural. The girl who had once fixed a broken car on a Manhattan street was now articulating a vision that could transform how the world thought about human potential. "Distinguished delegates," Harper began, her voice carrying clearly through the massive assembly hall, "I stand before you not as an exceptional case, but as proof of an exceptional truth. Extraordinary ability exists in every community, in every economic condition, and in every corner of our world. The question is not whether talent is distributed equally, it is whether opportunity is distributed equally." The Martinez Foundation network had grown to encompass 47 sites across 6 continents, serving over 1,200 children who demonstrated exceptional abilities in fields ranging from quantum physics to sustainable agriculture. Each location maintained the original foundation's core principle of community integration while adapting methods to local cultures and needs. The results had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. In Mumbai, 14-year-old Arjun Patel was developing water purification systems for urban slums. In Sao Paulo, 12-year-old Isabella Santos was creating educational software for children with learning disabilities. In Lagos, 10-year-old Emmanuel Okafor was designing solar energy solutions for rural villages. Each of these children remained deeply connected to their home communities while participating in a global network of young innovators. The traditional model of education assumes scarcity, scarce resources, scarce opportunities, scarce talent. Harper continued her UN address. But our experience has proven that abundance is possible when we stop limiting children and start empowering them, when we provide tools instead of barriers, support instead of skepticism, and connection instead of isolation. Walid watched from the gallery, still amazed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. The shy billionaire who had once measured success purely in financial terms had become a global advocate for educational transformation. His relationship with Harper had evolved from patron and protege to partners in a mission that had reshaped both their lives and thousands of others. The personal transformation had been as significant as the public impact. Walid's business practices had fundamentally changed, with his companies now prioritizing community investment and employee development over pure profit maximization. His board of directors, initially skeptical of his philanthropic distractions, had come to recognize that his involvement with the foundation had enhanced rather than diminished his business acumen. Harper has taught me that true leadership means empowering others to exceed your own achievements, Walid had explained to a conference of business leaders the previous month. The most successful investment I've ever made was not in oil, technology, or real estate. It was in human potential, starting with one remarkable child who showed me that intelligence and character are humanity's most abundant resources. But the growth and recognition had not come without challenges. As the network expanded, maintaining quality and consistency became increasingly complex. Cultural differences required careful navigation, and the pressure of international attention sometimes threatened to overshadow the local community focus that had made the original foundation successful. Harper had navigated these challenges with wisdom that continued to astonish adults around her. When tensions arose between network sites, she insisted on personal visits to understand local contexts and perspectives. When media attention became overwhelming, she implemented strict boundaries to protect the privacy and normalcy of participating children. When funding pressures threatened to compromise educational principles, she advocated for slower growth rather than diluted quality. The hardest lesson I've learned, Harper had confided to Dr. Rodriguez during one of their regular mentoring sessions, is that success can be just as dangerous as failure if you're not careful. People start expecting you to be perfect, to have all the answers, to fix every problem. But I'm still learning too, still making mistakes, still figuring things out. Dr. Rodriguez had been documenting Harper's development throughout the entire journey, creating what would become a landmark study in gifted child psychology. Harper, what makes you unique isn't just your intellectual abilities, though those are extraordinary. It's your emotional resilience and your ability to maintain perspective, despite enormous pressures and expectations. The UN speech represented both a culmination and a new beginning. Harper's presentation outlined a comprehensive plan for scaling innovative education globally, but also emphasized the importance of preserving local autonomy and cultural identity within any international framework. We propose not a standardized global curriculum, but a flexible global network, Harper explained to the Assembly. A system that connects children across borders while respecting borders, that shares resources while honoring diversity, that promotes excellence while ensuring inclusion. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Education ministers from dozens of countries requested meetings to discuss implementation strategies. International development organizations offered funding and logistical support. Media coverage sparked public conversations about education policy in countries around the world. But perhaps most importantly, the speech inspired other young people to step forward with their own innovative ideas and solutions. Social media filled with videos of children demonstrating their projects, sharing their struggles with traditional educational systems, and expressing hope for more inclusive approaches to learning and development. Maria Martinez, now the official international community liaison for the Foundation Network, watched her granddaughter's UN speech from the family's new apartment, still in the same neighborhood, but significantly more spacious and comfortable. The transition from poverty to financial security had been managed carefully, with Harper insisting that any changes to their lifestyle be gradual and sustainable. She's still the same girl who fixed the washing machine when she was 6, Maria reflected in an interview later that day. And success hasn't changed her heart. It's just given her bigger tools to work with. She still comes home for dinner, still helps with groceries, still worries about her friends and neighbors. The only difference is that now her friends and neighbors include children from around the world. As Harper concluded her UN address, she returned to the personal story that had started everything. 2 years ago, I approached a stranger whose car had broken down. I offered to help because I believed I could make a difference, even though everyone around me laughed at the possibility. Today, I stand before you with the same belief and the same offer. We can fix the systems that limit human potential. We can create opportunities for every child to discover and develop their unique gifts. We can choose to invest in abundance rather than accept artificial scarcity. She paused, scanning the assembly hall filled with some of the world's most powerful leaders. The question is not whether change is possible. The question is whether we have the courage to embrace it. Thank you. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 10 minutes, but Harper's focus was already shifting to the next challenge. After the speech, she would meet with education ministers, participate in strategy sessions, and continue the detailed work of building systems that could support exceptional children around the world. But first, she had promised a video call with Sarah from Montana, who had just been accepted to MIT's early admission program at age 13, and with Zoe from Atlanta, who had received a research grant to study marine biology. These connections, child to child, dreamer to dreamer, innovator to innovator, remained the heart of everything Harper had built. As the assembly hall gradually emptied, Harper stood quietly at the podium for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a fire escape above a bodega to this global platform. The girl who had seen a problem and believed she could fix it had grown into a young woman who saw a broken world and refused to accept that it couldn't be repaired. The work was just beginning. 3 months after Harper's UN address, the Martinez Foundation Network faced its greatest crisis. A coordinated investigation by education authorities in multiple countries had been launched, questioning the legal and ethical framework of the international program. The investigation was spearheaded by Dr. Victoria Hensworth, a prominent child welfare advocate who argued that the network was creating an elite parallel system that undermined public education and placed unrealistic pressures on participating children. The crisis escalated when 15-year-old Marcus Thompson, one of Harper's earliest mentees, suffered what appeared to be a severe emotional breakdown during a high-profile science competition. Video footage of Marcus crying and withdrawing from the competition went viral, with critics using it as evidence that the Foundation's approach was psychologically harmful to children. This is exactly what we warned against, Dr. Hensworth declared in a press conference. These children are being pushed beyond their emotional capacity in service of adult ambitions. Marcus Thompson's breakdown is not an isolated incident. It's the inevitable result of treating children as experimental subjects rather than human beings. Harper watched the footage of Marcus's breakdown with a mixture of heartbreak and determination. She knew Marcus better than perhaps anyone except his own family. She understood the pressures he faced not just from the program, but from a society that expected him to be either a success story or a cautionary tale. With no space for the normal struggles of adolescent development, "We need to go to him," Harper told Walid and her grandmother. "Marcus isn't having problems because of what we're doing here. He's having problems because the world won't let him be human while he's also being exceptional." The decision to visit Marcus personally, against the advice of lawyers and crisis management consultants, represented a defining moment for Harper and the Foundation. At 12 years old, Harper was about to face the most challenging situation of her young life. defending not just her educational philosophy, but the well-being of a young man she considered a brother. Marcus lived with his foster family in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood not unlike the one where Harper had grown up. When Harper arrived at his apartment, she found him sitting alone in his room, surrounded by the engineering projects that had once brought him such joy. Now those same projects seemed to mock him, representing expectations he felt he could no longer meet. "I let everyone down," Marcus said quietly when Harper entered his room. "I let you down. I let the foundation down. I let all those kids who look up to us down. Maybe Dr. Hensworth is right. Maybe we're just kids pretending to be something we're not." Harper sat down beside him on his bed, her heart breaking for her friend. "Marcus, do you remember what you told me when you first joined the foundation? You said you finally felt like you belonged somewhere, like your ideas mattered, like you could be yourself without apology." "That was before," Marcus replied, his voice hollow. "Before everyone was watching, before I became a symbol, before every mistake I make reflects on hundreds of other kids." "Listen to me," Harper said, with an intensity that made Marcus look up. "The pressure you're feeling isn't coming from the foundation, or from me, or from your own interests. It's coming from people who can't accept that kids like us can be both gifted and human, both exceptional and normal teenagers." She took his hands in hers. "You had a panic attack during a competition. You know what that makes you. A 15-year-old kid who got overwhelmed in a stressful situation. It doesn't make you a failure or a fraud or proof that our approach is wrong. It makes you human." Over the next 2 hours, Harper and Marcus had the most honest conversation of their friendship. They talked about the isolation they felt, the responsibility they carried, and the constant pressure to represent something larger than themselves. But they also talked about their genuine love for learning, their excitement about solving problems, and their commitment to creating opportunities for other children like themselves. "The question," Harper finally said, "is whether we let other people's fears stop us from doing what we know is right, or whether we find a way to address those fears while staying true to our mission." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "What do you mean?" Harper smiled for the first time since the crisis had begun. "I mean, we tell our story. The real story. Not the version that critics want to hear, or the version that supporters want to hear. We tell the truth about what it's like to be kids like us, including the hard parts, the lonely parts, and the parts that don't fit into neat narratives." The idea that emerged from that conversation would transform not just the immediate crisis, but the entire public understanding of exceptional children and innovative education. Harper proposed that the Foundation Network create a comprehensive documentary project featuring honest interviews with participating children, their families, and their communities. The project would show the full reality of their experiences, the successes and the struggles, the joy and the pressure, the extraordinary achievements and the ordinary teenage problems. "We stop letting other people speak for us," Harper explained to the Foundation board the following week. "We speak for ourselves, honestly and completely. We show the world that we're not victims or symbols or experiments. We're just kids who happen to be really good at certain things and who deserve the same support and understanding that any child deserves." The decision to move forward with the documentary project, despite ongoing legal challenges and public criticism, represented the ultimate test of Harper's leadership and the Foundation's values. They would either emerge stronger and more legitimate than ever, or face the possibility that their entire movement could collapse under the weight of public skepticism. As cameras began rolling and interviews commenced, Harper realized that everything they had built, every child they had helped, every life they had changed, every assumption they had challenged, now depended on their ability to tell their story with the same courage and honesty that had guided them from the beginning. 6 months later, Extraordinary Ordinary, the real story of gifted children, premiered simultaneously at the Cannes Film Festival and in community centers throughout the Martinez Foundation network. The documentary, produced in partnership with several major studios but maintained under Harper's creative control, presented an unflinchingly honest portrait of what it meant to be an exceptional child in a world that struggled to understand and support such children. The film's most powerful moments came not from showcasing the children's intellectual achievements, but from revealing their emotional authenticity. Marcus Thompson appeared prominently throughout the documentary, discussing his breakdown with remarkable maturity and explaining how the support of his foundation community had helped him understand that vulnerability was not incompatible with excellence. "I learned that having a panic attack doesn't make me weak," Marcus said in one of the film's most quoted segments. "It makes me human. The problem was never that I was struggling. The problem was that everyone expected me to struggle silently and perfectly, like some kind of robot programmed for success." The documentary's impact was immediate and transformative. Education policies in dozens of countries were revised to better accommodate exceptional learners. Teacher training programs incorporated new modules on identifying and nurturing diverse forms of intelligence. Most importantly, public conversation shifted from whether exceptional children should be supported to how such support could be provided most effectively. Dr. Victoria Hensworth, who had led the investigation that sparked the crisis, issued a public apology and requested meetings with Foundation leadership to discuss collaborative approaches to child advocacy. "I was so focused on protecting children from potential harm," she admitted, "that I failed to recognize the very real harm of limiting their opportunities for growth and self-expression." Harper, now 13, had grown into a confident young leader whose influence extended far beyond education. Her approach to problem-solving, combining intellectual rigor with emotional intelligence and community focus, had attracted attention from leaders in business, technology, and social policy. Yet she remained grounded in her original mission and deeply connected to her community. The apartment above the bodega had been converted into a community learning center. While Harper and her grandmother lived in a nearby brownstone that Harper had specifically chosen because it kept her within walking distance of her original neighborhood. Every evening, she could still be found helping younger children with homework, fixing broken appliances, or simply spending time with friends and neighbors who had known her long before she became a public figure. Walid, whose own transformation had been as remarkable as Harper's rise to prominence, had restructured his business empire around principles of community investment and human development. His company's profits had actually increased as employee satisfaction and innovation flourished under more supportive management practices. Harper didn't just change education, Walid reflected during a television interview marking the documentary's release. "She changed how I understand success itself. True wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you enable others to achieve." The Martinez Foundation network had grown to serve over 3,000 children across 78 locations worldwide. Each site maintained the original philosophy of community integration while adapting methods to local cultures and needs. More importantly, the network had spawned hundreds of independent programs inspired by Harper's approach, but developed according to local visions and priorities. Perhaps most significantly, the broader conversation about education had shifted toward recognizing and nurturing individual potential rather than enforcing standardized expectations. Harper's influence could be seen in policy changes, curriculum reforms, and cultural attitudes that increasingly valued diverse forms of intelligence and achievement. On the 3-year anniversary of the Rolls-Royce incident, Harper returned to the exact spot where she had first approached Walid. A small plaque now marked the location, reading simply, "Here a child proved that extraordinary things happen when courage meets opportunity." The plaque had been installed by the city, but Harper's favorite part was the addition made by neighborhood children. "And ordinary kids can do extraordinary things." Standing there with her grandmother and Walid, Harper reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, brilliant child who had offered to fix a stranger's car had become a global advocate for human potential, but she had never lost sight of the simple truth that had motivated her from the beginning. Everyone deserves the chance to contribute their gifts to the world. "What's next?" Walid asked, a question that had become their traditional way of planning for the future. Harper smiled, looking around at the bustling neighborhood that had shaped her and that she continued to call home. "Whatever problems need fixing," she said simply. "There's always something that needs fixing, and there are always people ready to help fix it if we just give them the chance. Every child possesses unique gifts waiting to be discovered and nurtured. Right now, in your community, there are young minds capable of extraordinary achievements who need only opportunity and encouragement to flourish." Harper Martinez's story began with one simple act of recognition, seeing potential where others saw impossibility. You have the power to change a child's life trajectory Whether you're a parent, educator, community leader, or simply someone who believes in human potential, you can make a difference. Start by truly listening to the children around you. Notice their interests, encourage their questions, and support their explorations. Challenge assumptions about what children can achieve and advocate for educational approaches that honor individual strengths rather than enforce conformity. Consider mentoring a young person, volunteering with educational programs, or supporting organizations that provide opportunities for underserved children to develop their talents. Every act of investment in a child's potential creates ripple effects that extend far beyond what you might imagine. The future belongs to those who recognize that extraordinary ability exists everywhere, waiting only for someone to believe in it and provide the tools for its development. Harper's journey from a poor neighborhood to global influence proves that transformative change begins with one person willing to see possibility where others see limitation.